But the truth is, we had a few issues in the past where people had problems with, like the Eventbrite, like messed up the date for whatever reason. I don't know why.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, the time zone was correct for me in California, which was 9.
Oh,
9 a.m. my
okay.
time.
Okay. I don't know. I probably have to raise this with support. I don't know. Maybe we set an event up and then we changed the time and just kept the old time, because right now,
Oh, yeah, for me it shows the correct time
okay,
for my time zone. Um, Interesting. Okay.
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 Yeah, okay, that's good to know. Okay, I guess that's something to take into account when we set up Eventbrite events in the future. So thanks for letting us know about this. I guess I can just send another reminder and maybe add the one more Zoom link, and I guess on the description for anyone who's confused. And I guess, you know, I guess we're recording this event, so hopefully people can see it afterwards. And I guess we just have to be more careful in the future. Unfortunately, some of those things are outside our control. Guess I can do much other than raise it with support.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe telling us we can, I guess, get started. Then in the background, you can then work on it, and then we'll see as people join in, and if they do it else, we can.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll just give me a second to just send one more reminder, and I guess I can share my screen. I'm gonna do a quick 5-minute intro, and then you can take over. Perfect. Okay, perfect. So let's get started. Okay, thanks everyone for joining today, and thanks for sorry for the mix-up in time. So today's talk is called From Zero to One, Building a Data Science Machine Learning / AI Capability. I'm gonna be the moderator host for tonight or this morning, depends on your time zone. Stefan is our esteemed guest. So in terms of who I am, I'm the CEO of the Test Academy. I've spent my whole career in the space of data science and AI. I've written 3 books, which I'm more than happy to share with you if you just drop me an email. And what the Test Academy, as well as my career, has been about, it's been about a lot about facilitating making it easier for leaders and for businesses to use AI, right? So we help businesses get started with data science and AI, but we also run programs for senior professionals, entrepreneurs, and managers who want to make the most out of AI. So make sure to go on our page to learn more about our services. We also have a lot of free content and free talks like this one that you're now watching. So here are some testimonials regarding our services and workshops, and here's some of the different clients we've worked with. You can find a lot more on our website, which I just shared in the chat. So today we're very lucky to have Stefan, who is an elite data scientist and engineer. He's a Silicon Valley veteran. He spent over a decade working across many different stacks, and in the last decade he has built like stacks for many prestigious institutions, as well as our big companies like LinkedIn and Nextdoor. And he's the CEO and co-founder of DuckWorks, which is a very, very interesting product in the space of MLOps and data engineering. I will not really go into details because I don't think I will do it justice. So I'll let Stefan take over the stage. And just a note, after the end of Stefan's talk, there's going to be a Q&A, a discussion. So feel free to stick around until 6 p.m. UK time, that is for the next 15 minutes. Thank you. So Stefan, the stage is yours.
Cool. Thanks, Janos. Come on, just let me. So in terms of questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try to answer them when I can. If not, I'll kind of defer to the end. Otherwise, welcome. In terms of first, some questions. So I'm just gonna ask you all just a brief question, just to get a sense of where you are on your journey in terms of building out a data science, machine learning, or kind of AI capability. So if you could please respond 1, 2, or 3 to one of the questions. So one is you have yet to start and on this kind of capability journey, right? So you haven't done anything. Second, you've done something, but things haven't gone too well, and you're trying to look for pointers to do things better the next time. And the third is just for people who have started, things are going, but you're maybe looking for different perspectives. So if you could please answer 1, 2, or 3 in the chat, that would roughly kind of give me a sense of where everyone's at. Awesome. Thank you, Tyler, Steve, Abhigya. Yeah, thank you. Cool. Cool. And then one other question. If you could also answer what industry you'd classify yourself in, because then this can potentially help me, try to frame some of the examples maybe that work a little bit more in your context. But I can't guarantee I'll be able to, ground examples for your particular industry. So if you're in sports, okay, cool. Okay, so very, very, very awesome. Cool. So I'll try to do my best. So in terms of myself, so to be honest, so how do I find myself here today? I've been over a decade in kind of Silicon Valley building and dealing with kind of machine learning and data platform systems. Now, I'm the co-creator of an open source project called Hamilton, and then subsequently started a company called DagWorks around it. Throughout my career, I've been, built machine learning and then switched towards more of the infrastructure kind of side of things and supporting people. But most famously, I was at kind of Stitch Fix, which was until recently was in the UK, but it's a personal styling service. So if you want to get clothes, it's a great place to kind of find them. They had a team of over 100 data scientists, and so I was, building tooling and infrastructure support, new initiatives, new teams, and things going from say like 30 data scientists. I saw it grow all the way up to over 100 data scientists. So some of what I'm speaking today will come from my experience at Stitch Fix, but then also from the other companies that I've worked at. In terms of characterization of a machine learning AI kind of capability, in terms of and what I've been doing to kind of help support, the way that I look at it is this kind of gross oversimplification of what a machine learning or data science capability is. You effectively have some data that then you're feeding into some sort of process, and then on the outside, on the outcome of it is some sort of business value or outcome. In terms of what kind of glues us all together, someone needs to generally kind of write some infrastructure or some code to make this work. Unfortunately, the middle part of this process, typically at most companies, ends up looking a bit like a Rube Goldberg machine over time. And so in terms of, you get data in, and then through some maze of processes, you eventually get some sort of outcome. Invariably, this is something that individual contributors or teams can end up struggling with over time, right? And so specifically, as kind of Stefan mentioned, I'm more on the engineering and kind of MOps side of things. And so to contextualize my experience and then what I'm kind of working on at DagWorks is effectively I'm trying to help get rid of when you're implementing these machine learning data science AI capabilities such that you don't end up with an internal Rube Goldberg machine, which is a little hard to kind of maintain and manage, and instead offer a standardized way of kind of doing things such that it can not only also help you accelerate your first iteration of things, but subsequently also ensure that future iterations as on machine learning, data science, and AI, you can continue to move quickly without having to be hamstrung by the way that you've kind of previously written things before. Now, I won't dive into more of the technical side of things in this talk, since this is going to be very high level. This is going to be more about, how do you get from 0 to 1, and then how do you ensure that, stakeholders and et cetera, you can kind of maintain and set expectations kind of appropriately. In terms of agenda, I'm going to briefly, it's the following. I'm going to talk a bit about, why should you be thinking about, data science, machine learning, AI, some common pitfalls and failures that I've seen in my, career, and then my guidance for how you can start from 0 to 1, and then a quick slide on some tactical kind of thoughts for actual, skill sets and tooling if you really want to get started in implementing things, and then, just summarize, what I think my take-home message for you all is today. So first is, so why? So why are you considering a machine learning, data science, or AI capability? Did anyone want to mention why, or have thoughts as to why you need to implement one?
I can give it a go.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are various reasons. What I've noticed is that usually for smaller companies like startups, this can often be a core, or the intention for it is to be a core competitive advantage, right? As in, not deep tech per se, but I want to create IP or use my data to create a data product that is still IP. In bigger organizations and enterprises, usually the intention is a bit more boring but solid. Like, I just want to cut down on my costs. I just like to increase my margins a little bit. Or what if we could do something like a recommender system and increase our sales by 5%, which, if an enterprise is, the larger an enterprise is, the more impact these small percentages can have on its bottom line.
Anyone else want to add to that? Cool. I mean, so yeah, like the way that I see it is like it's a tool. It's kind of this capability that exactly kind of what Stefan was saying. Like maybe this is something from a business perspective you can use to increase your top line. So how much money you're making, right? How much revenue you're bringing in. Or it's something that can help with costs, so increase your bottom line, right? So can you, with customer support being a classic example, can you reduce the amount of spend you have on customer support, or make them be able to do more and expand their capabilities so that you can decrease costs that way. And then in general, in this stage, it could be from a startup perspective, right? You need this from a competitive perspective, need to offer it as part of like how you're doing it. But then also, if you increase your top line and bottom line, your business is healthier, so it can also stay more competitive within the market. In terms of images, just to mention, I'm going to have a lot of DALL-E created images, and so I thought I gave DALL-E a prompt of the slide and actually created this nice image. And actually, I feel like it actually embodies things pretty well. Where the tree, I think, symbolizes if you incorporate things well, you can kind of grow and do a lot with your business if you do things correctly. So onto common pitfalls and failures, and so if you encounter these, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fail, right? These are just mainly some things that part of these are struggles that you potentially have to deal with and you have to figure out. So invariably, maybe these are things that slow you down, but some of these things can potentially kill your project. I've tried to group these into 4 areas, right? That at least logically makes sense to me. And so the first area that I've kind of seen, people struggle to build things out is that they have trouble kind of measuring, right? And specifically, you need to be able to measure business outcomes. And so you can run into troubles here if you aren't able to kind of prove the value of what you're doing to the business, right? And so and in an ideal case, you always want to be able to measure it, but and so, for example, in e-commerce, right, the average order value of purchases is maybe a metric you care about, or in a call center situation, the number of calls per hour an agent can kind of do, right? You need to be able to measure some business metric that the business kind of values, but then you need to, of the work that you're doing with machine learning, data science, or AI, be able to attribute that, like, hey, you can actually change it, right? And so, for example, if you trying to create a better personalized email, right, and the idea is to get more people to click through to the website, so the machine learning model or the thing you're building might be optimizing for how do you get people to click on more emails. But if the goal of the company or the endeavor is to actually, increase the average order value because you've personalized the email and you're getting people to buy more, you need to be able to attribute and say that, like, hey, your model actually, led to, increased sales because you can, be able to measure that, like, people came from this specific email and that then, actually went on to do purchases. If you can't do that, right, then you're going to have a hard time explaining the effect of kind of what you're doing. And so, this is something that, people run into. The other is, a headwind that people run into is potentially not understanding, the cycle time it takes to potentially measure an impact of your capability that you're building out. So at Stitch Fix, for example, Stitch Fix would send out clothes in boxes to people, but it took on average, a few weeks for people to kind of actually, decide whether to keep something or to kind of return it. And so you needed to incorporate that kind of cycle time to understand, like, is your model or is the thing that you're doing improving kind of an outcome? Classically in healthcare, this is actually, you might have a prediction for, what better treatment to kind of provide someone, but the outcome, you won't know the outcome for, months to maybe even, years, right? And so if you don't have a good handle on this, then it's, potentially hard for you to, actually, manage expectations in a way that, the exec team or the sponsor feels like they're getting their investment or money's worth, right? And so if something takes 6 months to prove out, are they willing to wait 6 months to kind of see that type thing? So, and then the other side is, you need to be able to also be able to measure things kind of appropriately, right? And so, in the world of LLMs, it now generates text, and so you also need to be able to, there's likely debate on, what's a good enough response from an LLM that suffices for your application, right? And so if you don't have a good handle on how to measure that, right, then you're not going to have a good way to kind of understand, how things are kind of performing. And feel free to, put questions or slow me down if I'm going too quickly. The second kind of area that I kind of see, projects or struggle to get off the ground is responses. Does anyone recognize this figure?
I do. It's from I've seen it in a lot of memes but yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it's familiar,
So,
I don't know what it
so
is.
this is the pointy head boss from Dilbert. And so I think the pointy head boss kind of embodies some of this kind of what I'm thinking about, or the personality type. Obviously, it's a stereotype, but yeah, Dilbert, yeah. There could be a lack of clear objective. So LinkedIn, when I was working there, used to have a question and answers product. It was pretty old. It wasn't much development, but there was a push to kind of revive it and put some machine learning into it, so that, when someone went to it, we could actually recommend what questions or answers that they should, be looking at for a particular kind of question. So I was put on the project to, add kind of this machine learning capability to it. But unfortunately, the project never shipped. It got killed. And that was because, not that the machine learning didn't have a clear objective, but the actual project itself did not have a clear objective as it related back to LinkedIn's overall goals, right? And so, you need to make sure that, whoever is sponsoring or doing things ensures that, like, the ultimate decision maker or sponsor for the project, right, has a clear and objective that, they're willing to stand behind, such that, you can actually ship your project. In the world of hype and LLMs, I've talked to people execs who are like, yeah, no, we need to do something with Gen AI, right? That might be good to, get excitement and do something, but ultimately the success of that project, if it doesn't, isn't backed by some sort of clear objective that relates to the business that the exec wants to stand behind, if there's, when push comes to shove, these types of projects are generally the first to kind of, get cut. And then you might have, alignment from the CEO, but then, internal exec alignment is, could be off, and people can have different competing priorities. And so, classic case of this is, you have a different org, you're in, marketing or something, and you're spinning up a data science capability to help them, but then they need, help from engineering, right? And so, if the things aren't aligned organizationally, and you always need to rely on another team, but they have different higher and order priorities, right? That could be a trouble to kind of resolve, in which case you then need to go up the food chain to then, change some teams' priorities to actually, to get your initiative out. Another way that I've seen this kind of project struggle is if you can't actually speak to the level of the executive, right? This is pretty much kind of a given, but if you hire some PhD or an expert in data science, machine learning, AI, they could be very smart, but they could struggle to actually speak business value or explain concepts that you're doing at a simple level. So if the CEO, boss, or sponsor can't understand what you're doing, then it's going to be hard to get support that you need, for things to happen. And so this is everything from, trying to explain model performance, like why there was an error, to then setting expectations of, what improvements or like what are the kind of, levels of improvement that can kind of happen. And so if you aren't able to communicate to them at their level that they understand, this can hamper your efforts. And then a lot of people who, a lot of execs don't have, they're not that necessarily numerically literate or, have, backgrounds that kind of match. Right. And so they can sometimes have an overly, perfectionist kind of view of what machine learning, data science, and AI can deliver. It's nice to kind of, you kind of need to maybe overpromise a little bit or say, to kind of, get excitement and buy-in. But that you need to kind of understand or temper those expectations to ensure that, they know that things aren't going to be perfect, because quite often things aren't perfect. And so being able to manage and maintain that expectation that, that, hey, this is going to be, things are going to be in progress and things are going to get better. But the first iteration isn't likely going to be perfect is, an expectation you probably need to maintain and manage. The third kind of, area of pitfall failures around data, right? So I think, this XKCD comic kind of, it summarizes one part of the struggle as well, right? Is that, given some data, if you just stir it around, you'll eventually, find some, some worth and some right answer, right? And what to me this generally relates to is, you might have data, but actually the quality of it might not be too good. An example of this is, you might be trying to optimize, say, click-through rates on your website. You're trying to build a model to kind of, predict or show personalized kind of ranks, but you realize that you have a large, a portion of bot traffic. And so this happened at Stitch Fix, where, people built models. They thought that, they tested that work well offline, but really in when they brought it to production, it didn't work because actually the data it was built off wasn't kind of realistic in terms of, predicting what actually people would do. And then this also relates to the labels. So having the domain expertise, right, in terms of, classifying whether something, is a good enough response in a customer support case, or an outcome in, healthcare, or, just a good prediction. If you don't have good labels, right, then the model or what you're training on isn't going to be, perfect. It's only going to be as good as the labels that you have. You also, might come into a project and it might not have sufficient amount of data, right? And so, especially if you're doing classic machine learning, you definitely need a bunch of data. With LLMs, it's a little less these days, but you also need to ensure that for the performance gains that you want, you also have the requisite amount of data. And so, this is a little context dependent on what you're doing, but that's also something that you need to kind of watch out for. And then the third area of data problems is availability. And so what you think could be available, say, in your offline or data warehouse kind of environment, might not actually be possible or accessible to where you kind of need things. And so, for example, at Stitch Fix, data scientists, there was a lot of profile questions that people would answer, but and so data scientists would start to build a model, but then realize that actually, when they got to production, that profile question was not being answered anymore. Right. And so the data that they were expecting to power their model was actually kind of not there. And so I've seen this at other places as well, where the data warehouse aggregates a bunch of data, but in terms of where the system or the model is supposed to be kind of deployed, the data ultimately resides in two different systems owned by two different teams, and it's unrealistic or infeasible to potentially change the organizational dynamics to get the right data to power your particular kind of model at the right place. Fourth area is a bit general, and I'm kind of bucketing a few things in here. I want to say it's very easy. Okay, so this is fine meme. To me, it's actually very easy to kind of be the dog in these kind of situations where, the way I interpret it is the dog doesn't actually know that things are on fire, and it's just like things are fine. And so some of these mismatches, right, you don't actually know that they're mismatches unless you kind of know and have seen it before or have sweated the details a bit. And so the goal is to hopefully identify or avoid being the dog in this kind of situation. And so one obvious kind of area of pitfall or failure is like you have a mismatch in terms of staffing. And so a classic case is people bought into they wanted a data science capability. They hired a data scientist. They're great, fresh out of school, statistician. But unfortunately, they're on AWS, and the data scientist doesn't have the support or the capability to self-service themselves on AWS to get things up and running. I've also seen this in terms of, in a recent engagement where there was a data scientist kind of team capability. There was a separate kind of cloud operations team, but the two couldn't actually speak the same language together. And so, in which case there was, staffing mismatch there in terms of being able to kind of, have people that fit the requirements of the project. So the way the other way that I think about it is your project requirements is some Venn diagram. And ideally, you want the people on the project to be a superset of it. And so, if you can't have people that match the entire, project requirements, you're going to, potentially, have some struggles. The other is organizational, right? And so, typically, it's not uncommon that for machine learning or data science or AI, you need to rely on some sort of team to provide data, right? And usually some engineering team that supplies it. But unfortunately, they're generally swamped and underwork, and their prioritization doesn't match yours, right? And so this kind of, is something that, organizationally, you kind of want similarly in this kind of Venn diagram setting. Ideally for the project, right, you have the alignment of the wider organization that is a superset of the project requirements for you to be able to kind of deliver things. Another example of this was in a recent engagement as well, where a data scientist wanted to bring in a vendor for infrastructure, right? But the security team kind of delayed or kind of slowed down the process markedly because they hadn't built a policy for how to kind of operate or bring in some sort of data infrastructure, right? And so here, the wider organization capabilities didn't match what was needed for the project requirements. And then the third kind of set of mismatches is around technical needs, right? And so here by analogy, I have a British plug, right? And so you have a certain set of assumptions, right? A certain shape of the data that you maybe have prototyped and built. And so it might kind of work in one context, say, development. But then when you bring it to production or the place where you're supposed to run it, it's actually, it doesn't match the kind of expectations. And so an embodiment of this is, at Stitch Fix, there was a data scientist who used a particular programming language called R to kind of build a model. They wanted to ship that and take that to production. But unfortunately, what worked in development didn't work in production because the production kind of requirements, needed things to be kind of quick and fast. Unfortunately, because of the way the data science had written things in R was not a good or compatible kind of vehicle for providing kind of predictions in a production context. And so you have to be wary of mismatches of what works in development needs to also work in production. And so these generally kind of revolve around kind of engineering kind of topics. That made sense. So I've covered kind of 4 areas in terms of common pitfalls and failures. So what's my guidance for going from 0 to 1? And so my guidance is going to be summed up in this mnemonic called MASS, where I feel to help from what I've seen for successful 0 to 1 iterations, they all get all these things right. And just to mention, it's not right from the beginning process, but something that you can adjust as you're building the 0 to 1 kind of capability. So again, we have this kind of this brief oversimplification of what kind of building machine learning AI, a data science capability is, right? The first thing you need to do is you need to be able to measure. And so specifically, you need to be able to measure the capability. So whether it's data science, machine learning, or AI, you need to have some sort of metric to measure, is it doing the thing that it's doing? And then you also need to be able to measure the business metric. So what, the business values, so, signups, average order value, things like that. So at Stitch Fix, a lot of effort, for example, went into ensuring that you could, measure not only the capability, but also the business metric that you could tie towards, right? And so first step is, make sure that you can measure these two things. And then, relating back to the pitfall, you also need to know that how long measurement's going to take, right? And so if you bring it in, how long do you need to wait to understand and see whether you're making an impact, right? And so this will, if you know kind of these two things, then this will help with alignment, which is the next step. And so you need with metrics, right? I think, and with knowing what you can kind of measure, you can align on a business outcome. Now, if you're a consultant who's brought in, you're generally probably align on the business outcome and then do the metrics. But I think, in terms of a successful project, right, you need to ensure that, A, you can measure things, and B, you've kind of aligned with the business outcome or value that you're kind of trying to build with this capability. Then, with that, you then, to try to, make sure you dodge any organizational problems, make sure that you align on priorities, right? And so if there's a stack rank of things that the business is doing, make sure that it's very clear as to where this fits in the priority list, so you can ensure that you can always go to people and people understand, right, in what order of things of priority that, they should be taking, your work into account. And then the other is, these capabilities are really perfect in the first iteration, right? And so making sure that, you will set the expectation that, hey, this is going to be an iteration, since, things, you can only, the first shot isn't going to be perfect. And so in which case, and also setting the stage for subsequent kind of iterations, right? That these capabilities need to be worked on and get better over time. And so making sure that, people or stakeholders know that, we're probably going to have some challenges, but in which case, as long as you've managed that expectation or set it from the beginning, it's then much easier to kind of, when things happen down the road, like, it's not going to be unexpected. And then you're going to kind of assess things. And so this is very context dependent, since, machine learning, data science, AI can be applied to a broad swath of things, right? But the point of assessment here is to really figure out, the gaps, so you can course correct and kind of plan, your 0 to 1 kind of correctly. I classify it into 3 areas. So you want to assess people, data, and technical. Now, some of these things you might not be able to change. So, for example, if you're given a set of resources of people, that's who you get given for the project, right? You're not necessarily going to be able to change that. And similarly, maybe you're running on AWS, you're not going to be able to use GCP or anything. And so in which case, some of these things might be fixed and you might not be able to kind of change, but, you still, I think it's worthwhile to kind of assess and understand what's going on. And so specifically, what I mean with people is, assess the relationships that you need. RACI is another, popular mnemonic of, responsible, accountable, consultant, and informed. So knowing the relationships you need in the business to be able to deliver the capability. So in startups, this might only be like in 1 or 2 people, but in enterprise, this could be, I need, to work with the data team to make sure I get the data. I need to work with the engineering team to make sure I can get it deployed, or the cloud ops team to provision resources, right? And so making sure you have a clear understanding of who's responsible and related for what, so that you can ensure that you can communicate with them. And then the other is skill sets, right? So you need to ensure you have the domain expertise for your particular area. So if you're working in healthcare, making sure, you have doctors or whoever that can tell you, give you the right expertise on labels and outcome. And then ensuring that the skill set, matches the technical environment. So if you're going to be running on AWS, right, then do you have the right people or the skill set to help you make and manage things run on AWS kind of appropriately? The second is, on data. So related to the pitfalls, you want to make sure that you have the right quantity, right? So you have enough that you can actually, use it. It has the right quality. So, make sure that, you check this kind of early to ensure that, hey, how good is the data? Are the labels kind of correct? Can I make use of it? And then availability. Right. And so with GDPR, for example, you want to make sure that whatever data you're given is actually given is being used for the right purposes as the user gave kind of consent for. You want to make sure that what you have in kind of the offline world or where you're prototyping is also going to be available to where you're productionizing and kind of pushing it out. And then the last one is technical. So you need to assess to ensure that does the technical environment match the people, right? It's okay if it doesn't, right? It's not nothing's ever perfect, but just understanding where the gaps are, right? Then can mean then you can more properly assess what to do or how to solve things. You want to make sure that the technical environment matches the objective. So if you are to deploy machine learning models to production, making sure that you have a means or a mechanism so you can actually kind of accomplish that, right? Some places, when they're building these capabilities, there's no infrastructure, so you need to understand how you can kind of do things. But for other places, enterprises, where things are already set, is just making sure that there's a path kind of forward. And then this feeds into a common kind of decision point is do you use vendors or do you build kind of things in house? And some of this is kind of related to the context of what the company is it a startup, is it an enterprise, what are the security policies, to do they have ways of moving forward or not, right? And so for me, for a 0 to 1 capability where you're trying to build out speed, right? In the ideal case, it's actually, I think vendors are great because ideally that's something you can pull off the shelf. They can get you kind of moving faster, and so you can then ideally show value sooner, which everybody likes to kind of see and do. But that might not be possible, and so in which case if you have to build in house, I want to say you should try to rely on open source wherever you can, and you might need to do this from privacy or security kind of concerns. But then you're going to make sure that then you have the requisite infrastructure and skill set to enable you to do things in house. And then the last part is start simple. So here I gave DALL-E, which is ChatGPT's kind of drawing AI, the prompt of draw me something with Occam's razor. So Occam's razor, for those who don't know, is a kind of a principle that where if you're going to do something, try to do it with the least assumptions or moving parts, right? And so here what I mean is that with data science, machine learning, and AI, there are a lot of techniques, and they are on a spectrum of complex, simple to complex. And the reason why I think you shouldn't worry about any of the complex techniques, and instead do start with the most simplest things, is because generally the data is the overwhelming factor of whether your capability or what you're building is actually going to be useful and worthwhile. Right, and so that is the first order thing, right? And so if you were to do simple versus complex techniques, the complex techniques might not even give you that much over the simple ones, but they're generally more complex and harder to kind of implement. And so the reason to start simple, right, is to ensure that you're not bogged down in this in the technical side of things, and instead you're really trying to focus on proving that you can provide value. Given the capability for the 0 to 1, with the expectations that you've aligned on with the business. And so, to give you an example, if you're doing data science or classic ML, right, this means that if you're going to build something, start with what's called simple interpretable models, right? These are there's a lot of implementations. These are relatively well known, and so, for example, linear and logistic regression being a classic one. XGBoost is another popular kind of tree-based kind of model. And actually, if Google actually has a handbook on starting machine learning, so I'll share these slides out and you have the link. But they actually even suggest that before you even do machine learning, that you potentially try to do heuristics to even prove out that there is some signal of value from the data. In the world of Gen AI, right? What this means, start simple, is really start with an off-the-shelf foundational model, and really you just want to use that model and what's called generally just try one-shot prompting. So effectively, coming up with a prompt that kind of has enough information that you can kind of do something. There is a spectrum here on the Gen AI space in terms of how you can augment and make it better. But I wouldn't jump to fine tuning, which is something that potentially could help. But really, you want to ensure that the first order effect of the data and the process and the outcome that you can kind of prove that first. In which case, you should just start with the foundational model and see how far you can get. And then implicitly, I want to say, this isn't a one and done thing, right? You need to kind of iterate, because as you do these projects, the world changes. So the business changes needs. The economy hits a recession, or things kind of happen, and so in which case, this potentially impacts some of the data. A new product is pushed out, or the business removes things, and so you don't have that data anymore. And so in which case, you need to effectively, bi-weekly, monthly, check in and make sure that, do you need to update your assumptions? Because, as things kind of changing. And so in terms of a project management mindset, right, data science, machine learning, and AI work is less of a waterfall type project, and it's more agile. Though data science, machine learning, and AI work does not fit into a perfect agile kind of project management strategy, because some of the things you're doing is research work, and that doesn't necessarily fit into a sprint kind of way of thinking. But in terms of the ethos of agile, at least being receptive to change and being able to assess, have retros and postmortems, I think is a good way. Is something that will help you ensure that as you're building out your initial capability, you're adjusting appropriately. And so, just to kind of briefly, tactically, just have a single slide on skill sets and tooling, right? In terms of skill sets of composing of the project or the people you need, right? I don't think there is, it kind of depends on the size and the scale of where you're operating as to, what the skill sets actually are. But the three things I do feel that you need to fulfill for this 0-to-1 capability is, one, you need to fill someone who can communicate. So make sure that you can communicate things simply, handle the stakeholders, right? Then you need to have the requisite domain expertise. So if you're doing something in a particular space, making sure that you have the time of people who can help you classify and manage whether the model or AI capability is doing what it's doing. And then obviously you got to have the technical knowledge to be able to implement it and actually build it and then put it into production. On the tooling side, unfortunately, I don't have advice that is very specific and detailed, because it heavily depends on your context of where you're running. But in terms of, if you were to start, like, I want to say Python is a language, a programming language, and that to me has it's a great place to kind of build these initial capabilities out with. And that's because it has a rich ecosystem of tooling and libraries and abstractions and open source projects that can help you kind of get things started along the way. One of those things, I'm biased, my own project called Hamilton. But otherwise, in terms of thinking about tooling and what you're bringing in, what's worked best for me is thinking about how can you minimize for operational burden. So meaning trying to use a bit of Occam's razor. So how can you reduce the amount of things you need to manage to kind of get something out? So this is where potentially going for vendors can help with that, because they can help manage and take away some sort of burdens. And then in general, rather than trying to do something complex or fancy, try to get away with doing things on the least amount of machines as possible. And if you need more memory or need more scale up the machine rather than trying to build more complex kind of infrastructure. So to close out and hopefully leave a little bit of time for questions, right? The one thing that I hope to leave with you is that, like, hey, if you're building out this capability, try to remember this mass mnemonic, right? So one is make sure you can measure not only the capability, but then also the business outcome that you want to kind of hit. Then you make sure you're always going to make sure that you're in constant alignment with your stakeholders and sponsors for this project as to what it's trying to achieve and what it's trying to accomplish. Having a good grounding on metrics and outcomes will help you with that. And then you just got to, make sure that you can assess, the people, the data, and the engineering or the technical side that's kind of required for you to actually implement things. And then from a technical perspective, that's simple. If you're doing classic ML and data science, use basic approaches. If you're doing Gen AI, just start with a foundational model, see how far you can get with just, some simple prompt kind of work. And then implicitly, right, this isn't, a one and done deal. This is something that you're going to, you want to iterate through and constantly assess. And so, plan for the project management side of things to do things in more of an agile methodology than a waterfall. And with that, if you want to, connect with me or want more help on, say, the technical side of things or understanding, how you can prevent, the implementation going off, would love to chat with you. But otherwise, happy to take questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Stefan. I think this was an excellent overview of how to build a data science function from really 0 to 1. And yeah, I was wondering whether anyone has any questions. I think maybe it would be good also if you could share Hamilton's link in the chat so others can join. I think it's a very interesting project and definitely useful for anyone who's growing a data science function. So yeah, like any questions, like are you trying to create your own data science function? Are you considering, how to go about it, how to specify the right question, how to find the right people to hire? Just feel free to shoot it. I mean, that's like an open forum.
I have everyone speechless.
Yeah, it looks like
Can't be.
it.
I mean, yeah, if you have to go, thank you very much for joining. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, if there's something you want to dig into, happy to kind of, I'm sure some of you had questions and hopefully I answered them. If they didn't, would love to know.
Mhm. Okay, here's one question from Zach. He says, in a lot of our work, we do the analysis ourselves. Do you have any advice on using AI analysis tools with prompts to look at net new data sets? Oh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah. So in terms of what would you like to see or get out of that, Zach? Uh, uh, since some of these tools are actually some of them are productivity gains, so they're not necessarily they can potentially help you and come up with theses, right? And so that's one way that I've seen people kind of use these tools is to like trying to help explain what's going on. Others it's more co-pilot like, and they help you kind of build things. But yeah, yeah, more context I could potentially help there. But that's kind of the way that I've at least seen people kind of use these tools as more of a productivity hypothesis type thing. Yeah, because like so for example, you could use these AI tools like, hey, given this type of data set, you can ask like, what should I be looking at, right? And so then it can help you, structure and give you some ideas, right? On like, oh, I maybe do this, look at this or that. And so a lot of that also comes down to making sure you can prompt things kind of correctly. But in terms of like if you're much like sometimes you have writer's block for writing posts or something, right? You can have analysis block, right? And so I think that's one way that I've been successful in using these tools. Yeah, because currently I haven't seen a tool where you can just give it a data set and it'll kind of do it like, but yeah. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks for the.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Actually, let me send you my email and LinkedIn. We'll also be sharing this presentation afterwards, and we might even run more events in the future. Again, apologies for anyone who got confused about the time. There was an Eventbrite mishap and then an issue with Zapier. So it does happen. So we did it. But for those of you who are here, we really grateful. It's great to have you with us. And, you know, we do these kinds of events like all the time, like trying to help our community better understand how to use AI and data science. Yeah, also let me type Stefan's at DocWorks.io. Yeah, maybe in the future we can even, yeah, just out of curiosity, while we're still here, for those of you who still are here, how many of you would be interested in a bit of a more technical presentation around Hamilton and DocWorks, like which might be interesting for those of you who already have a data science function or just about to embark on this journey? Like, give us some ideas.
Okay, so yes. So Kumba, what's the best way to learn data science and how to land a job in tech? What's your advice? I mean, so this is where so data science is a bit of a broad umbrella term, and like each company kind of has a slightly different definition. Some of it it's an analyst support kind of function, right? So they're mostly doing analysis in SQL. Others are actually more of a machine learning engineering function where they're actually prototyping, productionizing, and taking things to production. And so part of it is really you need to understand where on the spectrum your skill set falls, and if there are any things you need to work on. There's obviously open source projects, but effectively you can't go wrong by learning some sort of programming language like Python and SQL. Right, those two, if you know Python, SQL, and then some statistical analysis and techniques, that probably should set you up pretty well. In which case, then it's just a matter of then doing practice interviews, understanding the metrics or measurement side of things, right? And so I think that's kind of the way that I'd approach it. Unfortunately, most interviews are still pretty, the more you do them, the better you'll get at them. So that's the other thing is, practice makes perfect. And on the internet, and there's, on Reddit, there are different forums, for example, where you can ask questions and people can give you, a lot of help and advice there in terms of, resources and that. And so that's kind of where I would start, is just making sure that you have, do you have the three skill set areas of, can you program in Python to a reasonable degree? It doesn't have to be great, super awesome. Some sort of SQL knowledge, and then analysis.
Perfect. Yeah. Anyone else? And again, let us know if you think that maybe a more technical event would be a good idea. Our audience is usually a blend of different types of professionals, so it would be good to hear from that. And I mean, if there are obviously no other questions, I think our time is nearly up, so we can wrap up. Yeah. So it looks like there are no more questions. So yeah, a round of applause for Stefan. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I think it was an excellent summary of how an organization can get started with data science. I think I agree with every point on that presentation. And yeah, we hope to see you again soon. Maybe we'll be running some more events in the future. Maybe Stefan would like to be our guest again after this very nice presentation. And we hope to see you again soon. For those of us who didn't get a chance to go on our website, here's the link. And yeah, make sure to also follow us on LinkedIn, and see you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.